My name is Marlene Nowotny. I'm a journalist working for the Austrian Broadcasting Corporation for Public Radio Ö1. Academic freedom is an important topic itself. It's a fundamental aspect of an open society, something we probably take for granted. We all observed how quickly and dramatically the political circumstances in our neighboring country, Hungary, changed. So we're not talking about academic freedom solely tonight, its challenges and dangers, but we're also welcoming the Central European University here in Vienna, which is moving here from Budapest. And to do so, I'm introducing the rector of the University of Vienna, Hans Engel.
Good evening. Academic freedom, the institutional autonomy of scientific research and academic teaching institutions, and the freedom of individual scholars and researchers to pursue and publish their research without the interference of authorities and committed only to the scientific standard of their fields. This is a cornerstone of any free society. In Austria, we are fortunate to have this right established in our Constitution. Artikel 17 Staatsgrundgesetz 1867, die Wissenschaft und ihre Lehre ist frei. Whatever this means in practice. Today, this freedom is under attack in many parts of the world by governments and political leaders, but it is also questioned from within academia and challenged by technological and societal developments. Even when it comes to political threats, we have witnessed worrying incidents that threaten academic freedom in recent months. There's a wide range of topics involved. The narrowing space for academic freedom in Hungary, China, and Russia. The closing of universities and even the imprisonment without charges of students, teachers, and researchers in Turkey. Controversies about free speech and political correctness in US universities. We are alarmed by these developments, and no country, also ours, is a priori immune to such dangers. In a democracy, academic freedom is fundamental for prospering science and open society. Concerning the challenges of technological process with the increased impact of the internet leading the way, academics now do have a much larger audience than they've ever had before in history of science. Open access publishing and open data lead to more visibility for research results. In our digital age, the rise of artificial intelligence and big data-driven science fundamentally change the way research is done, which creates new problems. Let me add, as an applied mathematician, that I'm a bit worried that data-driven models may lead to confusing correlation with causality, a problem which is of course not new. Research in this area is sometimes driven much more by commercial and political interests than by the curiosity of researchers. As universities, we have the chance and the charge to combine these impressive new methods with models based on first principles which allow us to analyze why a system behaves in a certain way. Data-driven models can augment, not replace this. We should not forget that science is based on hypotheses, theories, and observations or experiments, which might also be computational experiments, to validate or falsify the hypotheses. At the University of Vienna, we will try to have a broad view on techniques like deep learning, including their limitations and even dangers. Recent years have brought threats to academic freedom, but also new perspective for academia. Science is or should be a resource of our future, even if this is sometimes denied, but it does not exist in a vacuum, as it exists within the boundaries of specific social cultural environments. And academic freedom should not be misused by confusing personal opinion with science-based inquiry. Today we are happy to have you, President Ignatieff, Provost Matej, and Prorector Fyodor, as representatives of the Central European University, but also in your role as scientists at our venue at the University of Vienna. Welcome to you, and a special welcome to the Central European University as a future partner in research and teaching, And of course, welcome to our keynote speaker, Professor Robert Zimmer, President of the University of Chicago. I also welcome Eva Novotny, Chair of our University Board, Georg Winkler, former Rector of the University of Vienna, Erhard Busek, former Vice-Chancellor and Science Minister of Austria, representatives of the Austrian Ministry of Education, Science and Research, led by Elmar Pichel, representatives of other Austrian universities and academic institutions, and representatives of the city of Vienna. I am now looking forward to an evening where experts can contribute to these important discussions, and I wish you all an interesting event. Thank you.
Thank you, Rector Heinz Engel. I may now introduce Michael Ignatieff. The Canadian historian is a university professor, writer, and former politician. He held academic posts on the other side of the Atlantic, at the University of Harvard, for example, and now here in Europe as president and rector of the Central European University. Michael Ignatieff.
Good evening. First of all, on behalf of faculty and staff from CEU, and they're all throughout here, and I hope our Austrian colleagues will make friends with, we've come up from Budapest. This is a very touching and special occasion. I want to thank Rector Engel for thinking of this wonderful idea. How many times can you remember a university in one city welcoming a university from another city as a partner and friend? It's a very moving moment for Central European University to be welcomed by a great university like the University of Vienna. And I just want every Austrian in the audience to understand how moved we are by this gesture, and grateful to our Austrian colleagues and friends for solidarity that is extended not just tonight, but through the whole experience that my university has had in the past 3 years. So thank you, Vienna. Danke schön. What can I say? We are so grateful for you. I also want to make sure that you mark in your calendars November 15th, because that will be the official opening of our new campus on Quellenstrasse. It doesn't quite approximate the unbelievable Baroque splendor of Rector Engel's premises, but it's not bad. It'll do. And on the 15th of November at about 5 o'clock, every single person in this room is warmly invited to join us as we open our campus. So it'll be a happy new beginning for this university in Vienna, and we look forward to being your partners and friends for many, many years to come. But I have to say that there's something scandalous about this as well. It's a scandal that a university in a European member state should be forced to leave its home for 25 years and relocate in another city. It's a political scandal. It's a moral scandal. It's an educational scandal. You've given us a wonderful welcome, but I think it's very important for us to always keep in mind the political dimensions here. We were forced to leave our home. You have given us a wonderful welcome, but we will keep our eyes firmly focused on Budapest and seek to keep a flag flying in Budapest with a strong presence, because our defense of academic freedom in our home has not ended. It, in fact, has only begun. The other thing I'd like to record is it's a very particular honor for me to be in the presence of President Zimmer. President Zimmer is a president of a great university, and he's been in his job for 13 years, which gives me renewed hope that you can actually survive this job. I mean, President Zimmer gives hope and inspiration to every university president around the world, and he's been an example in the defense of academic freedom, and I look forward to hearing his remarks. I want to talk just very briefly about the challenges to academic freedom that we have faced. They've been of an external character and of an internal character. The external character of these threats is familiar to you. But it would be entirely wrong to see this as just a narrow political battle between George Soros on the one hand and Viktor Orban on the other. The right way to see the challenge to academic freedom in Hungary is that the attack on CEU was the culmination of a very long, concerted process of the consolidation of a single-party state in a member of the European Union. A process of consolidation that began in 2010 with changes to the Constitution, with the elimination of the independence of the Constitutional Court, with restrictions on the freedom of the media. And then, naturally, once you've begun that consolidation, it moves inevitably to an attack on the independence of a free institution. It's also important not to think of the problem of academic freedom in Hungary as being a problem particular to CEU. Please remember, as academicians yourself, that the attack is now extended to the Hungarian Academy of Sciences, which is an immensely distinguished apex of the entire Hungarian academic system. And it too has lost its autonomy, its capacity to allocate scientific resources freely. And this, it seems to me, is part of a sinister pattern that didn't begin with the attack on CEU, began in 2010 with the consolidation of single-party rule. I think another thing that we have learned from our experience is also worth thinking about. When we appealed to European institutions to defend academic freedom, we discovered something that everybody in this room needs to understand, that the constitutional and legal and treaty guarantees of academic freedom in the European Union are extremely weak. If you come under threat, God help you, from the academic freedom in Austria, and you turn to European remedies, look out. European treaty law does not give European academic institutions the guarantees of freedom they need. We do not have enforceable guarantees at law, and that seems to me a very important agenda that all academic forces across Europe need to work on, so that we can improve those guarantees for every institution working in a member state. So that's something about the external threats to academic freedom. Let me say very briefly as well that as a president of what I regard as a liberal institution with a small l, there are substantial internal threats to academic freedom, which President Zimmer may refer to. We have had situations where students in the university I love have walked out rather than listened to a speaker who presented ideas that they found threatening to their identity or threatening to their convictions. That was the worst day of my presidency as president of the university, not the external attack, but a moment where internally students walked out from listening to something they didn't want to hear. This is what I mean by an internal threat. We have to strengthen within our students, within our faculty, within our staff, a conviction that academic freedom is sometimes a tough experience. It means listening to views and opinions with which you radically disagree, which challenge your identity, which challenge your convictions, which challenge your settled beliefs. But that, surely, is what academic freedom is for. And if we cannot have an academic freedom and a defense of it that sometimes is disturbing, unsettling, and changes us, this is not a freedom that's worth defending. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Michael Ignatieff. a campus culture committed to discourse, argument, and lack of deference, a university committed to academic freedom. According to Robert Zimmer, this is the reason why the University of Chicago is associated with so many Nobel Prize winners, or at least this is how the New York Times quoted him. Robert Zimmer is a mathematician, like the rector of the University of Vienna, Hans Engel, and he's the president of the University of Chicago. And the title of his keynote is simply Academic Freedom. Robert Zimmer.
Good evening. It is a great honor and privilege for me to be with you today at this historic moment as Central European University moves its primary location to Vienna. I want to begin by expressing my great admiration for the founders and leadership of CEU, including George Soros, Michael Ignatieff, and Leon Botstein, who have been consistently committed to creating and sustaining an outstanding university and who have resisted efforts to suppress the academic freedom necessary to have such a university. Their work has required clarity of vision, commitment to values, and demonstrated courage. I likewise want to express my appreciation to the City of Vienna, and particularly the University of Vienna, for welcoming CEU, and to the University of Vienna for recognizing the significance of the moment, not only for Central European University, but for universities worldwide. The University of Vienna has a truly remarkable record of achievement over its long history. It also understands well from experience the destructive force that repression brings to society and its universities. Both components of its history make it deeply meaningful that the University of Vienna is taking such an active role in promoting academic freedom, and I want to express my great appreciation and admiration for Rector Hans Engel and his colleagues at the University of Vienna for this highly consequential stance. Well, the story of Central European University has its very particular elements. There are aspects of this story that are playing out around the globe, reflecting our time of grave challenge for universities worldwide. Namely, the values of academic freedom, open discourse, free expression, deep questioning, and broad intellectual challenge are under significant attack. The specific social, cultural, and political drivers of such attack vary around the world, but these threats have many commonalities as well. The stakes are extremely high. We should not underestimate them. In responding to these challenges, each university will define what it is, what it stands for, the nature of its education and research environments, how it is contributing to the future of its students and the work of its faculty, and collectively what that means for our societies. And in turn, the way a society as a whole reacts to these circumstances for universities will reflect what it does or does not value, and intentionally or not, will profoundly affect that society's future. To deal with these challenges, it is singularly important for universities to have clarity about fundamental principles and values to guide us in making potentially difficult decisions. Without clarity about fundamental principles and the guideposts that they provide to action, decision-making will inevitably become reactive, and the likely result will be the weakening of universities by sequential catering to one segment or another of its complex constituency. It is precisely these fundamental principles that I will discuss today. Specifically, I want to address three questions. First, what are the principles of academic freedom, open inquiry, free expression, and intellectual challenge about, and why are they so important? Second, what is the state of academic freedom and open inquiry on campuses today, and how can we explain it? And third, what should be the nature of our response to the current situation? So let me begin with these principles of academic freedom, open inquiry, free expression, intellectual challenge, what they are about and why they are so important. And to do so, it's useful to emphasize what I will not discuss, namely the stance in law of various countries toward free speech. As we all know, different countries have different histories and cultures, and their precise stance toward speech and society as a whole may reflect these differences. While this is a fascinating topic, it is not my topic today. Rather, my topic is about the mission of universities, what they contribute to society, particularly over the long run, and what is necessary for universities to fulfill their mission at the highest possible level of excellence. It is precisely in this context that considerations of academic freedom and free expression arise. Universities, of course, have two core missions, education and research. From their inception in Europe almost a millennium ago, universities have sought to empower their students for their futures beyond their studies. Needless to say, the conception and potential shape of these futures has evolved dramatically over the centuries, as has the education that universities offer. But this mission has been an enduring one. And today, from the world's great research universities to the smallest of colleges, this is one widely accepted mission. The research mission of universities was not as explicit for many years, although there was often a great deal of research taking place because of the intellectual quality and interests of certain faculty members. But with the founding of the University of Berlin in 1810 by Wilhelm von Humboldt, the trajectory of the university world changed. Research became an intrinsic and explicit part of the mission, and for research universities, education and research became intertwined. Inquiry became the heart of universities. Inquiry into fields of research and education embedded in an environment of inquiry. The latter is captured nicely in a statement by Friedrich Schleiermacher, a broad thinker in Germany who was an active participant in the intellectual ferment that led to the founding of the University of Berlin. Schleiermacher, writing in 1808, just before the university's founding, describes the goal of university education as enabling students, now I'm quoting in translation, to become aware of the principles of scholarship so that they themselves gradually acquire the ability to investigate, to invent, and to give account. Academic freedom, free expression, open and uninhibited discourse, questioning of assumptions and of dominant paradigms, and ongoing intellectual challenge are critical values for universities because their presence is required in a powerful and effective environment for research, education, and the inquiry that lies at their foundation. Faculty involved in research need to revisit assumptions, freely explore new and imaginative approaches, develop, sharpen, and test new ideas, and understand boundaries, where their ideas and those of others apply productively and where they do not. Students need to develop a set of intellectual skills and habits of mind, to confront new and different ideas through various modes of inquiry, recognize assumptions, both their own and those of others, understand legitimate competing interests, analyze unintended consequences, know the difference between a desire and an argument, appreciate context, history, and change, learn how to synthesize different perspectives, and to coherently advocate a position. These intellectual skills and habits of mind will be essential for students in their futures as they address the complex work, societal, and personal challenges they will confront, whatever their future path. So intellectual challenge, free expression, and open discourse are therefore critical as a foundation for supporting both research and education. Abridging these features simply makes us worse at fulfilling our mission. We defend them because we're committed to the importance of research and the education of our students, and we seek to do this at the highest level of excellence that we can achieve. Mediocrity is easy. And if mediocrity is the aspiration, one can allow some erosion of these values. But excellence should be our aspiration. And excellence is not easy, and it comes with a price. And in this case, the excellence of research and education at our institutions comes with the price of ensuring that the values of academic freedom, free expression, open discourse, and intellectual challenge are sustained and not eroded, are lived every day and not only when convenient, and are defended when attacked. And as we know well from history, and as we see in the case of CEU, this is not always simple. And why are these missions of education and research so essential to society? Every society faces complex challenges, and the world, encompassing many different societies and their interactions, adds a whole other layer of complex challenges. Understanding how to think about these challenges, the multiple perspectives from which they can be viewed, the nature of discovery that can help address them, embedding relevant understanding of context and history, anticipating change, all of these are immensely challenging tasks, whether in science and technology, in policy, economics, and business, or in the stewardship and understanding of society's cultures and how they might interact. Universities are the core societal institutions for building the foundation for dealing with these challenges. The research they carry on today, the leaders and contributors to the future that they are training, provide, as no other institutions in society provide, a sustained capacity for addressing society's multiple and multifaceted challenges. With the benefit of having universities of excellence, an enlightened, broader society should, and sometimes does, realize the importance of academic freedom, free expression, and open discourse to its own well-being. Now let me turn to my second topic, the state of academic freedom and free expression on campuses. And understanding this demands more historical context. I've described the critical importance of these values to the education and research missions of universities and their capacity to contribute to societies around the world. Nevertheless, as we know, the history of universities' academic freedom and free expression tell a much more complex story. Over the centuries, there have been constant battles over these issues with religious institutions, state authorities, and political and moral claims-based movements. One of the most famous of such battles with religious institutions was that of the Catholic Church with Galileo, who was a professor at the University of Padua, had been doing research that supported the heliocentric view of our solar system, a view the Church found deeply problematic on the grounds of religious dogma. The decades-long battle culminated with the Inquisition trial that led to Galileo's guilty plea and house arrest for the remainder of his life. This is but one example of such battles with religious authorities that lasted for centuries. The struggle with state authorities, of course, has a similar long life. Our own times have seen dramatic such examples. In the middle of the 20th century, the great University of Berlin became a shadow of its former self, first because of the Nazis and then the East German regime. The University of Vienna itself suffered a similar fate during the Anschluss and its aftermath. and the universities of Eastern Europe are now in various stages of the process of recovering from the weight of domination by the Soviet Union. In the 1950s, the United States saw enormous pressure on universities to curtail free expression during the McCarthy Red Scare era. And of course, it is state actions designed to curtail academic freedom that have led to the move of Central European University to Vienna. Beyond religious institutions and state authorities, there can be many other demands to constrain academic freedom and open discourse. Various political or moral claims movements have also regularly sought constraints on universities. They have come from all parts of the political spectrum and have come both from within universities and outside universities. This is a major issue in the United States today, as many individuals and groups are making constant demands upon universities to silence those with perspectives they find offensive or even that just make them uncomfortable. Moreover, as frequently the case for groups filled with self-righteousness, many simple, well-meaning behaviors are given malignant interpretations followed by demands for corrective action. Many universities are, in fact, acceding to these deeply misguided demands. This has also become a major issue elsewhere in the United Kingdom, for example. It is one of the great issues of our times for higher education in the United States and beyond. The most dramatic and public ways in which political or moral claims movements from within universities are constraining free expression and academic freedom are the long list of disinvited speakers, including, for example, Christine Lagarde, Henry Kissinger, Condoleezza Rice, and Larry Summers. Other speakers being shouted down and not being allowed to speak, and faculty being called to task in a variety of ways for having controversial views. Sometimes violence has erupted because of the objections of a segment of a university community to a speaker's views or background. These, however, are just overt symptoms of yet more widespread problems. On some campuses, there is a tone of discourse ostracizing those with currently unpopular views. Faculty are concerned about bringing up certain topics and saying certain things and reflecting certain ideas for fear, not of disagreement, but of being demonized. And some universities are actually fostering an environment in which students' feelings of discomfort with ideas take precedence over the importance of actually discussing ideas. How students interact with each other is often a casualty of these damaging tendencies. Students should be learning from each other by working through and discussing different opinions, analyses, backgrounds, perspectives, and cultures. But the environment of demonization and ostracism of those with opposing views can choke the inter-student discourse vital to an education. These examples demonstrate that in addition to large-scale institutional structures, such as states or religious institutions, sometimes seeking to constrain academic freedom, demands for problematic constraints can arise from less formal but still potent political or moral claims groups, again, often from within universities themselves. This indicates that the formal protections provided by adhering to policies of academic freedom and free expression need to be amplified by an institutional culture that supports argumentation, challenge, and respectful open discourse, allowing for deep disagreements, and an acceptance that discomfort will sometimes be a consequence of such a challenging environment. Let me relay a quick anecdote that I like about such a culture of intellectual challenge at the University of Chicago. It concerns 3 Nobel laureates in the Department of Economics at the university: Milton Friedman, Jim Heckman, and Bob Lucas. After Milton Friedman died, we had a memorial service for him at which I was going to speak. And by total coincidence, Jim Heckman was in my office a few days beforehand. And I asked him if he had any thoughts about what I might say. He suggested I read a paper of Friedman's entitled Positive Economics, and he was sure I would find it helpful for preparing my remarks. I followed his advice, read the paper, and as predicted by Heckman, found inspiration for my comments. Following the service, we all went to a reception, and there I ran into Bob Lucas. Lucas said to me, "Nice remarks." Then he paused for a moment and continued, saying, "But I always had a problem with that paper." And then he explained to me what might appear as a minor nuance he felt was a real difficulty connected to the nature of knowledge and science. So Lucas was continuing to argue with Friedman, even at Friedman's memorial service. And that is a reflection of an uninhibited environment of intellectual challenge and engagement. Now, given my remarks about why academic freedom, free expression, and open discourse are so important to universities and through them to society, why is there so much historical and present-day opposition? One part of this is not at all surprising. The long-standing issues with certain religious and state institutions are in many cases simply about power and its maintenance. There is evident fear that allowing open discourse will foster ideas that in one form or another will constrain the exercise or even maintenance of power. This is often accompanied by claims of either moral or political rectitude and value. You never hear anyone say, "My having authority is not so great, but I want to suppress discourse anyway." Suppression of academic freedom is always accompanied by valued claims, when in many cases the real issue is simply authority. But as we have discussed, there are also calls for suppressing open discourse and academic freedom from those not necessarily in a position of institutionalized power, but who make moral or political claims to validate their own position of suppression. Here again, we should not be surprised, because in truth, many people, perhaps even most people, don't really like free expression in all its complexity. They fully support and are deeply committed to free expression for people they agree with. But tolerating speech that you may find offensive, dumb, morally questionable, politically objectionable, producing discomfort, or religiously undesirable is not something everyone naturally embraces. In other words, one reason we see a constant effort to constrain academic freedom and open discourse is that some people are trying to keep certain views unexpressed and unheard out of self-righteous moral or political indignation, an agenda driven by such moral or political views, and comfort arrogating to themselves and those they agree with the right of speech while denying it to others. We've seen this throughout history, and we see it today in all the moral claims arguments in the United States, the United Kingdom, and elsewhere. Therefore, in promoting an environment of academic freedom, free expression, and open discourse, one is always working against strong undercurrents that may rise and become visible at any moment. My third topic is what to do about this situation of assault on principles so important to the quality of education and research. And I will mention 3 items that I believe are relevant. First, as I indicated earlier, is clarity that these are fundamental principles for the very meaning and quality of universities. There is a contrary view, which one sometimes hears explicitly and more often sees implicitly, which is that universities are very complex institutions with a very complex set of interested parties and constituents, many things they are trying to accomplish, and many issues that must be balanced. and that academic freedom and free expression are either explicitly or implicitly just one of the values among many that must be balanced, weighed, and sometimes traded off. With this position, it is inevitable that university leaders and faculty will find themselves succumbing to great pressure for constrained speech. Therefore, a primary approach necessary for maintaining academic freedom is the clarity that this is not just one of the hoped-for features of universities, but for the reasons I described earlier, is essential to universities' very meaning and mission and the fulfillment of that mission at the highest level. Second, one cannot rely solely on formalisms and policy. One needs to build and sustain a culture that lives open inquiry every day. This means a constant effort on the part of faculty and university leaders to promote and model the values of open inquiry and intellectual challenge in all their work on campus every day, and for students to learn to appreciate why these values are so important to the very quality of their own education. Otherwise, it is too easy to have a set of rules and policies about academic freedom, but at the same time, a sterile and quietly suppressed environment that embodies fear of discourse and engagement of disparate views rather than one that embraces robust discussion. The third feature is courage. Whether dealing with attempts by an institutional authority such as a state or with a passionate group of moral self-righteousness claiming moral authority and virtue, standing for principle is not simple. It requires courage, which increases the chance for success, but of course, in truth, cannot guarantee it. And as I said earlier, we are witness to such courage today on the part of Central European University and its leadership, as well as on the part of the City of Vienna and the University of Vienna, for which, again, I want to express my admiration. Let me conclude by returning to Galileo. There is a well-known and perhaps apocryphal story that after being convicted, he muttered, "Eppur si muove," and yet it moves. It is up to us today, perhaps, to rephrase Galileo at this important moment for academic freedom in universities throughout the world by saying, out loud this time, "Eppur pensiamo, eppur parliamo," and yet we think, and yet we speak. Congratulations once again. Thank you very much. Dankeschön.
Robert Zimmer just said it, academic freedom is under attack, and we are going to talk about the reasons for his remarks now. I may introduce the panel to you now. Eva Fodor, she's a sociologist and pro-rector for social sciences and humanities at the Central European University. She has been actively involved in the university's ongoing political struggle against the Hungarian government's attempts at forcing the university out of the country. Liviu Matei. Liviu Matei is Professor of Higher Education Policy at the CEU School of Public Policy and Director of the Yehuda Elkanah Center for Higher Education. And he is also the Provost of the Central European University, who was, like Eva Fodor, very much involved in fighting for academic freedom in Hungary. Next up is Jean-Robert Tirant. He's the Vice Rector for Research and International Affairs at the University of Vienna. He's Professor of Public Economics here at the university and the Director of the Vienna Center for Experimental Economics. Katerina Sarikakis is Professor of Media Governments and Director of the Media Governments and Industries Research Lab at the Department of Communication at the University of Vienna. And I would like to invite Robert Zimmer back to the stage, President of the University of Chicago. So when I received the invitation for this discussion tonight, I was thinking about a book, and not exactly because of the topic of the book. It's by Charles Dickens. It's called Tale of Two Cities. And it starts with famous words. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times, it was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness, and so on and so on. So it is very much exciting to welcome an important academic institution like the Central European University here in Vienna. And at the same time, this is the reason we're talking about academic freedom today, about the dangers, the threats, the challenges, and how quickly political circumstances can change, even in a democracy in the middle of Europe. Livio Mattei, do we live in the season of light, or do we live in a season of darkness?
Well, you said it. No, it is both at present, and actually it is quite remarkable that you are citing Dickens, because we had yesterday, was it yesterday? No, on Friday, the academic year opening in Budapest, and I cited Dickens because the history, the tale of our students this year will be a tale of two cities. They will move between Vienna and Budapest. I added the part about the spring of hope and the winter of despair as well, and I think I promised our students that we will make our best to make sure that theirs will be the best of times and not the worst of times in Vienna and in Budapest. And that's not foolishness, you know. We believe we can really do that. Now, if we ask ourselves, answering your question in a way, what are we doing here? We from CEU, what are we doing here this evening, and what are we doing coming here? And of course, as everybody said, we are here to celebrate academic freedom. We are also here to celebrate academic solidarity, and we cannot thank enough our colleagues from the University of Vienna, Rector Engel, Prorector Tiran, everybody who in Vienna and in Austria, other universities for this. But the fact that we are celebrating academic solidarity also indicates that there is a need for solidarity, and I would say this is not a good time at all. It is a time of crisis, a crisis of academic freedom, and as it was said here, it is not only in Hungary. Academic freedom is under attack, is challenged almost everywhere in the world, but I would make a point, and perhaps I can come back to this later, that we in Europe are living to a time of academic crisis, and this is a European crisis. There are challenges everywhere, but there is something very specific in Europe, and we have to take ownership of this crisis. So we are here because Vienna and Austria, although part of Europe, is not in the same way in a crisis than Hungary, and we think we are bringing something interesting to the scientific academic life of Austria, and perhaps I might have a chance to talk about that a little later. Thank you.
Eva Fodor, Michael Ignatieff talked about it, but maybe you could go a bit more in depth. How did this decrease of academic freedom in Hungary come about? What experiences did you make? When did it start? Are we talking 2 years ago, 3 years ago?
This is a long process. So threats to academic freedom did not start with the law that forced CEU out of the country. In fact, it had started much earlier. Hungarian universities' freedom had been limited for a long time. Their financial, the government decided to and started to exercise control over their finances and academic control of all sorts. But it was about 3 years ago, actually in 2017, that the government passed a piece of legislation that changed the Higher Education Act. And it is this piece of legislation that led to basically the expulsion of the Central European University from Hungary. When we started to fight back and argue with the government and make our case, I thought that if the government, it seemed so impossible that this could actually happen. So I thought, if this really does happen, and if in the end CEU is forced to close or forced out of the country, this would be a minor issue in the history or in the life of Hungary. It would be a minor political problem. And indeed, I was right. So many other threats to academic freedom are experienced by my academic colleagues in Hungary right now that were not evident 2 years ago, that our problems, to some extent, seem minuscule. It particularly seems minuscule because CEU has somewhere to go. We are lucky to actually be able to come to Vienna. But my colleagues who work in the research institutes of the Hungarian Academy of Sciences are now facing complete instability and insecurity about their job, about what they can write about, full control over the kind of research that they can be doing, and overall, and possibly the same is true for my colleagues, or many of my colleagues in various universities. Just to give you an example, the Hungarian government a few years ago, actually a year ago, banned gender studies. So my colleagues who had been teaching gender studies, are sort of out of a job. That's not quite true because they continue teaching, continue what they can do, but indeed what they can teach is strictly limited, both because of the financial and the intellectual control that the government exercises over their lives and their research and academic projects. So the case of CEU is unique to some extent, but it's part of a lengthy challenge to academic freedom and freedoms of all sorts, liberal freedoms of all sorts in Hungary, as well as in many other countries.
So, of course, you protested the Hungarian government, other European governments and academic institutions protested. Liviu Matei, how was it possible to ignore all that?
That is a good question. It was possible if we look for a simple and short answer. And Michael Ignatieff basically explained that the Hungarian government has the power to ignore that. They have 77% of the seats in the parliament, having won 52% of the votes, with fewer than 50% of the people coming to vote. But then, nevertheless, they can adopt any law they want, modify it next day, modify it back eventually. That doesn't happen. But there is something more than that. And if I may go back to this idea of a crisis of academic freedom in Europe, this is a political crisis. It is a policy regulatory crisis, but it is also an intellectual crisis. And we have to be aware that it is an intellectual crisis because we had a lot of reflection on higher education in Europe the last 20 years with some remarkable developments, new concepts, new models. We have ignored academic freedom. Until recently, we haven't even spoken about academic freedom. We have taken it for granted. The concept is underdeveloped. If we do a survey now, I know that we would not agree what is academic freedom, and the Hungarian government exploited that. And that is not, this intellectual crisis has also policy, legal reverberations. The European Commission sued Hungary for infringement of academic freedom, in our case. And the answer of the Hungarian government was, based on what? Where is any kind of reference, European reference about academic freedom, let alone legal reference? Something, as a matter of fact, does exist, but is not exactly applicable. So the Commission changed the head of charges. When the first hearing in our case, well, we were not there because we are not legally a party, but when the hearing took place in Luxembourg at the European Court of Justice, the European Commission changed and made the case about the right of establishment, right of delivery of commercial services, and that is what the case is about rather than a case of academic freedom. So it was possible to ignore all these protests, including legal action, because as Michael Ignatieff said, there are no European standards, there's no European regulations. We do have a European Union, which is a reality, legally and otherwise. We have the European Higher Education Area, which has a reality, but the academic freedom is not there or is underdeveloped, and this is one of the factors that made possible for a government like the Hungarian government, the Turkish government. There are so many other cases in Europe, not only governments attacking academic freedom, but political forces, businesses, and that, I would say, this is one of the reasons. We lack a well-developed concept of academic freedom in Europe.
One last question about the CEU. You said before CEU is now a tale of two cities. Eva Fodor, how are you settling in? What are the next steps? You're going to open your doors in November.
We are slowly moving. We're transitioning to Vienna. This first year is a transition year. We'll have about 600 of our students studying in Vienna. These are the incoming students who will be enrolled in university here in Vienna. We will still be teaching the students who are already enrolled, who are continuing students in Budapest. So our faculty will be coming and going, and you can imagine the logistics of moving faculty and then later moving some of the students back, some other students here over the course of an academic year. So this is going to be a complicated year, and we spent almost a whole year preparing for it. But this is to lay the foundation for what is to come, which is the year after, when basically the whole university, the degree teaching is going to move from Budapest to Vienna, and we'll be teaching all our students here in Vienna. So that's not going to be this academic year, but the coming academic year.
Jean-Robert Théran, Hungary has shown how fast academic freedom can become a privilege. We're talking about academic freedom in the whole of Europe and that it is under threat. So what do we have to do here in Austria to protect this privilege?
It is indeed a privilege, and it's in the Constitution, as we've heard, but whatever it means, as the rector said, things can change. So perhaps to follow up what Liviu said, I think academic freedom has two aspects. It's one, it protects the individual researcher, and the other is it protects institutions as a whole. So the individual researcher should be able to pick the topics he likes, use the methods he likes, presents the results and his or her conclusions without fear of oppression. So it's an individual, the individual is protected, but it's also about protection of institutions. So it's university autonomy, it's the right of self-governance and self-regulations. We have this privilege, but many people, not you here in the audience, you are affine to this, yes, but in the general population, some people resent this privilege. They may think this is not an earned privilege. And we have to, and populists, as we have seen in other countries, can foment this emotion, and it can quickly turn sour. So I think also in Austria, we have to work hard to earn the trust of the population, to win the hearts and minds, to convince people that academic freedom at the end is also the freedom of the people. And we can do lots of things to stand up and defend academic freedom. So one is, sometimes it's called third mission, so to engage in dialogue with the population, to explain what we're doing, why we're doing it, and to do it in a language that is open, that is accessible, not condescending. Sometimes scientists are somewhat on a high moral horse. So to use also a language that is inviting to the public, such that we can communicate in a good way. And this is very necessary, especially in Austria, for basic research, which is in some sense is the most free form of research, if you like. Yeah, it's bottom up, it's curiosity driven, it's about finding answers rather than solving problems. And Just to give you one example, the European Commission has asked people in 27 countries, EU countries, representative samples, the question, even if it brings no immediate benefits, scientific research which adds to the knowledge should be supported by the government. In all countries, there were between 60 and 82% of the people who said yes, we should go. In Austria, it was below 50. So there is work for us to do, to go out into the population, to communicate. This is our mission, is part of our mission. It's the third mission. We should do research also, but it's part of our mission to go out and convince people that we need the academic freedom to do this basic research, and at the end of the day, it's the freedom of everyone. Thanks.
I think one of the places where you can engage with the public, where you can communicate these days is social media. And social media is a place where academic freedom can be limited or maybe give you certain advantages as a researcher. Katerina Sarikakis, how do you experience the topic of academic freedom and social media?
As with everything, I suppose, technology brings an exaggeration in two directions. One is the legacy and triumph of freedom and liberty to discuss, to explore, to ask questions, to get immediate knowledge, to connect with all those whom we agree with, and to trash those we don't agree with. And on the other hand, this is positive sometimes, and on the other hand, of course, this liberty comes with responsibilities and etiquette, if you like, that we are not prepared or willing to uphold and learn and practice. So it comes with things like hateful speech, attacks, and this is not simply a matter of freedom of expression, I would say. This is a matter of enabling further freedom of expression, therefore academic freedom, or silencing. I have experienced myself, although not to a dramatic effect, the effects of attempts to intimidate this freedom of expression as an academic in relation to third mission that you mentioned. We work together with refugees, and it has been a collaborative work with the CEU, actually. It all comes together, strangely. We have received messages such as, insulting messages about the work we're trying to do to integrate people who were forced to leave their home, to integrate them into, first of all, thinking of the possibility of studying, entering these wonderful spaces, and entering a space of free thinking. And because our topic is now academic freedom in the digital era, let's not forget that academic freedom means not only doing the research, her research, their research, but also teaching. And I think this is where it all comes together very, very vividly and in a very immediate way. When suddenly, through digital media, through a continuity, if you like, of the digital world and the physical world, faculty in particular, but also sometimes students, find themselves in fear, find themselves intimidated to express uncomfortable ideas and to experiment with the possibility of uncomfortable questions. And I think this is this turns back into what you were mentioning, the courage needed to defend academic freedom, living academic freedom with clarity every day. It's not easy. And for that we need legislation, because the law actually cements societal norms and culture. So we need legislation. Therefore, this is one step to overcome some crisis, institutional crisis, legislative crisis. We need independent tools and organs, instruments that will look into our own practices, the internal university practices, again and again. And we definitely need a committed crowd. We need the crowd outside of the university, these buildings, and the crowd inside. And this is where third mission comes into, where we have a dialogue or multi-logue with society, where actually society itself, the margins of society or other parts of society, help shape our research. Because without this kind of social support, we have very little grounds to stand for. And this is very, very concerning that in Austria it was below the average, the EU average, the support for academic discovery, if you like, or exploration without an immediate effect. And because I'm an academic, I can talk forever, so maybe you, yes, I will stop here.
Yes, please, Robert Zimmer.
Yeah, is this working? Yeah, okay. I just want to comment on one thing that I think everybody's touched on in one way or the other. And that is, I think it's important that you actually make a case for academic freedom that goes beyond it's a great thing. And so when you're inside a university, it's the natural thing. You feel like it's really good. And just claiming that it's sort of a piece of freedom in general, I don't think is an adequate argument. I often tell people when you look at the Constitution of the United States, the preamble, it talks about a set of things that the government is there for. There's nothing there that says either academic freedom or scientific research. It says other things, and you have to make an argument that academic freedom is going to actually do something for people and for society, which is a little bit what I tried to argue. And I think it's an important argument to figure out how to make, and it's going to be different in different cultures, and it's a little different in the United States than in Europe, where the relationship of private to public is a little different. But I think the issue is important because it can just look like a privilege of some collection of people. And, well, yeah, sure, we all want to do what we want, but why should the government spend all this money supporting a bunch of people who are just doing what they want? I mean, what's the argument? And so there has to be a real argument, and it's actually a serious question. Government has finite resources, and people want to know and should want to know, why are we doing this? And we need to have a really good answer to that in any particular society. And it doesn't do enough to look at this just from an internal point of view. I think we have to look at it from an external point of view.
Yes, of course.
Well, this is another very interesting and important argument. I mean, coming from where we are coming, which is Hungary, a question that I am asking immediately is, does this work for all governments, democratic and non-democratic governments? If we make this argument in Hungary, they will just ignore it. So I think we very often forget, when we talk about academic freedom, mission of universities, responsibility of university vis-a-vis society, political regime, there's a big difference between democratic and non-democratic regimes. And unfortunately, in Hungary, currently, we have something that is called illiberal democracy, but we know what that stands for. On the other side, another question is, how do we make this argument, right? It's not a privilege. I mean, the old scholarly argument is that universities are about education, knowledge, which the society needs, transmission of knowledge, production of knowledge, and universities in turn need, you said it in the Calvin report, an environment of freedom in order to produce this for the society. But how do we tell that to the people out there? And it made me think when you asked about whether people supported us in Hungary or abroad, and we had several demonstrations in favor of CEU in Hungary, one of them with 85,000 people. ordinary people from Hungary, and the slogans were free country, free university. And we didn't organize it. It wasn't organized by us. So does this tell us that people, ordinary people, care about freedom or freedoms in the university, about academic freedom? I would say yes, but there are only certain moments when they understand that and they realize that, and then they would manifest their support in favor of principles that might sound so abstract as academic freedom. And Hungary and our story was such a moment. I don't think there was any other university in the world that had 85,000 people on the streets protesting in favor of that university. So that might help us to find the answer to this question. How do we let the people know that what we are doing and for which we need academic freedom, it's a public good and not a privilege?
I have also a reaction to this. I mean, many of the things we talked about have a rather idealistic perspective on academic freedom, but there are also very pragmatic aspects on it, and you mentioned resources. So I think this is, from a pragmatic perspective, is a very important aspect, sustaining academic freedom, because any type of funding of a university has its pros and cons. So, for example, at the University of Vienna, we have the privilege, we are lucky enough, so to speak, to have almost 80% government funding. It's a base funding, which is very different in your places, for example. However, which is great because there is some continuity. However, there are strings attached to it. The government tells us, we have an agreement with the government, which actually has 90 pages, where the government tells us in detail, okay, we give you the money, but we want you to do this and this and this and this and this. And of course, there is a negotiation process going on, but the government tells us you have to provide certain performance measures. So many graduates, so many third-party funding, so many citations, and so on. So in pragmatic terms, there are pros and cons to this. On the other hand, we see a strong development that everywhere in Europe, actually, that the emphasis on third-party funding grows a lot, which is a competitive way to collect funding, which has some advantages, of course, because people have to think hard about what research will I actually want to do and lay out some coherent scheme, and that can be very productive and conducive. And then if you win it, it shows that you had a great idea, or other people thought that you had a great idea at least. So it's also a recognition. But then it forces you to say, what's it good for? What's the impact? What's the policy relevance? And you spend your time in writing applications rather than doing research. So there's also a con on this type of funding. So what I would like to emphasize that, yes, academic freedom is in the abstract, is an important thing, but in practical terms, you have to make sure that there is a balance in the way the university is funded, such that not one type of risk is not exaggerated. In your university, it's probably quite different with the sources of funding.
But it would be interesting to know, do your students tell you what to research on?
Clients.
Because university fees are high, or you have private donors. Do they try to influence where research is going?
Yeah, so this is a very strong point, and it goes to this question that you have to keep these values in front of you every minute, because there are going to be issues that come up from all sorts of forces, whether it's from the government, whether it's from people with strong opinions, whether it's from donors, who are going to be pushing you to do something that you don't want to do. And by don't want to do, what I mean is, from my point of view, the job of the university is to protect the freedom of the faculty and the freedom of the nature of discourse inside the university for students' education. So I think we take protecting the freedom of the faculty as an absolute imperative, and we won't do anything that doesn't do it. I mean, I can't tell you how much money you turn down when you want to do that, but we do that all the time.
Can I?
Yes, of course.
I actually think that you made me think that, in fact, the two of you made me think that, in some sense, authoritarian regimes show us best how important academic freedom or the freedom of inquiry is. Because we tend to speak about academic freedom here in these really broad terms, something that belongs to a university, something that's guaranteed by a government. But academic freedom is also everyday practice. And even in an authoritarian regime, there are little pockets of academic freedom. There are little pockets of opportunities where people can do research in a way that they want, but people can write what they want. And nothing demonstrates this better than under state socialism, where people published, self-published, the samizdat, it's so-called samizdat literature under state socialism, which arguably contributed a great deal to bringing the regime down. So it had important political, intellectual consequences, that little pocket of freedom that contributed to the collapse of an authoritarian political regime. So it's not that difficult. If you look at the example of an authoritarian country, it's not that difficult to understand the profound significance, I believe, of the freedom of inquiry, the freedom of speech, freedom of writing, and freedom of research.
Well, this is another very important topic, kind of everyday aspect of academic freedom, and I would like to bring another aspect which speaks about us at CEU. Put that on the table. When we moved to Vienna, it is not only that we have new buildings, programs. We move the programs, the curricula from one place to another. We accredit them. We have the same faculty policies because we use the American research-intensive model for faculty policies. But what will move, it's also a few thousand people. Our students, our faculty, our staff, their families. And this is, when we talk about moving one university from one country to another, in this case, this is a forced movement of population. Thousands of people, they have to leave their houses, their kindergartens, all the parents sometimes leave them behind or find a way to bring them here. So this is a very drastic aspect of everyday life in academic freedom. Of course, many will say it is bad, but Vienna is not bad, and it's true. Coming to Vienna is not the worst that could happen to us, and we are not sent to jail like in, or not yet in Turkey, for example, and in some other European countries. And this is true, but there is a very powerful, down-to-earth aspect of academic freedom, everyday life aspect, and I wanted to really bring this in to discuss it as well. And I think to add to it, we should not forget academic freedom is not only about academics, faculty members, researchers, and it's also about teachers. It's very important to remind it. And it's also about students and about their right to make choices, which have to be, organized choices. In some countries, including European countries, students cannot choose the field of studies, for example. Is that a matter of academic freedom? Absolutely, absolutely yes. And we can discuss whether academic freedom also applies to university administrators, and the answer is probably yes. So it is a complex concept, not only an abstract one, and it affects our lives. Of course, it could be a lot worse. So we are not at all in the worst situation in the world.
Jean-Robert Tirant said it before. Science should open up to the public and should communicate more in that sense. If you have any questions, please raise your hand and you will try to answer them. I will not try to answer them. Wenn Sie die Frage auf Deutsch stellen wollen, dann werde ich mein Möglichstes tun zu übersetzen. Geben Sie uns einfach ein Handzeichen. I thought it was pretty interesting before that you said there are no binding laws supporting academic freedom within the European Union. You said the same about the United States. So Is that a goal that one should strive for, having laws that are somehow formulated to guarantee academic freedom, or could that in the end also become a problem?
Well, in many European countries, legislation exists and it's put in practice that protects academic freedom. There were several cases this year in Germany where either academics were taken to court or academics went to court to defend themselves, and the German law is very strong and it protects academic freedom. It is not the same in all parts of Europe, and because we have the European higher education area, it is actually not enough to have good regulations enforceable in a particular country. You know, Norway has they have a very clear definition of academic freedom articulated in the law, but then you have a Norwegian student coming to Hungary cannot study gender studies. Or you have a Norwegian academic coming in an Erasmus exchange to Germany. So there is, I'm making the point about the need for a European reference, and Michael Ignatieff also said it's a far road to the legal definition, but at least a conceptual one. And I'll say one other thing and then I stop. My own area is higher education policy. I study academic freedom. I can talk a lot about that. This is also what I teach, so I teach what I preach, and the other way around. And as a researcher of higher education, the last 20 years in Europe have been remarkable, fascinating. There are so many interesting developments, good, very good, bad, and extremely bad. And let me give you one example of a fascinating subject to study, which goes back to the distinction that Prorector Tiran made between academic freedom and university autonomy. We in Europe have a European model of university autonomy. It is very influential, very consequential, including in other parts of the world. In this model, which started being elaborated since 2007, 2008, there's not even once mention of academic freedom. The phrase academic freedom is not mentioned. And university autonomy is understood exclusively as the freedom of the institution. And one of the perverse effects of this is that other parts of the world, other countries like this European model, like Myanmar, where we are doing a lot of work, and the Myanmar government has a project now to introduce university autonomy, but there is no talk about academic freedom, zero. And when you want to mention, what about academic freedom? No, look at Europe, you did well with university autonomy only, so why talk about academic freedom?
Can I comment
Yes,
on
of
this?
course.
So it's quite interesting to listen to this conversation because and you see an interesting difference in the culture between Europe and the United States and the relationship of the private sector to the government, which is there's a huge resistance in the United States among private universities, and I testified what I'm about to say before Congress, to having the federal government intervene in any way about these issues regarding free expression on campuses of private universities. And just to be sure everybody knows what I'm talking about, the First Amendment of the Constitution, which people talk about a lot, is about only what the government can do or not. The First Amendment says Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. It's entirely about what the government can do. If you're a private university, it's totally irrelevant to you. It says nothing. But there's a huge hesitancy on the part of private universities to allow the federal government to be commenting on what is an internal dialogue inside the university. Because the minute there's a legitimacy for them to comment on one thing, it opens the door to them commenting on something else. And all of a sudden, you have the federal government involved in what is admissible to be said, what are the boundaries you put around it, what can be taught, and this is absolutely an anathema to everybody in a private university. So public universities, because they are in fact, to some extent, agents of the state, do have First Amendment obligations, a very sort of complex legal problem about what are the First Amendment obligations. of public universities, but private universities want no part of the federal government interfering in this problem, and everybody recognizes it's a problem, but not to be solved by the federal government.
Professor Sarikakis, so we're surrounded by a lot of crises. There's a crisis of democracy, a crisis of the quality media, there are threats to academic freedom. Is this all linked together?
Thank you for this. I was about to say that despite the differences of, both sides of the Atlantic have different jurisprudence and different approaches to what should be regulated, what should not. We do seem to all understand that there are spaces in social life that need to be protected from interference, first of all. And these spaces, the space of university and the production of knowledge, the exploration is very much connected to the space where you're active in, the production of information, the generation of information, the investigative practices. And it seems to me that, as my co-speakers, co-panelists also mentioned before, this is a complex process that is taking place over a longer period of time. You don't destroy something overnight. You make visible, the destruction visible, perhaps, overnight, but you have to go through processes that allow the legitimacy of destruction to take place within society. And what we have witnessed in Hungary, for example, is unfortunately a crass degree of visibility of destruction that we are facing in Europe in other areas, such as the journalistic profession, which is under attack from multiple sides. It's a cognate field of inquiry with academics. Actually, to a great extent, we walk parallel paths, often hand in hand, how to ask questions. Then we part our paths. We say journalists simplify, academics make things more complex. You try to give answers, we try to give questions. But in any case, this complexity is the space where society is invited to reflect upon itself and to keep those in power in check. And when those in power, those aspiring to go into power, interfering with these processes, then we have a crisis of legitimacy of institutions, crisis of trust of population in institutions, a crisis of processes that don't take place as they should, for example. And unavoidably, I think, I tend to come always to the same place, which I don't know if this is the right place to be, but unavoidably, it is an individual matter and a social, communal matter, question in many ways, is the degree of integrity both an individual and an institution can demonstrate in making sure that these values are protected. And these are not idealistic, utopian, abstract values of freedom. These are values that are being tested every day. Whether you, for example, you support a specific curriculum, whether you enable uncomfortable questions to be asked and discussed, whether you protect the people whom you actually expose in the middle of a room, of a classroom, of a lecture theater of 1,000 students. We have those kinds of lectures at the University of Vienna, by the way, which come with the commitment for to allow higher education for all. So you need to every day test your own personal, private, individual integrity. Yeah, not only when it's comfortable, but as an institution, you need to do that in your everyday. And Again, I think the point here is that we are connected with society, with fields and professions that are also under attack. Journalists are being killed, are being jailed, are being silenced, again through hate speech, for example, through direct actions by the government, but also through the precarity of profession. Academics suffer also under these conditions. So we need to make, I suppose, the academic world, the students are doing a better job than I suppose we academics do, but we're learning also. We need to foster closer ties to other professions that are aiming at the same, which is information, knowledge, inquiry, questions.
I think looking at the political situation in the United States and also looking at the political situation here in Europe, the boundaries of what people could say in a public discourse, in a political discourse, they have been kind of stretched. Today it is possible to say things that were not possible a few years ago in the sense of political correctness. Now, before you said that the respectful discourse in the classroom is not possible in a way anymore that it used to be possible. So are those, I don't know, developments that, I don't know, work against each other?
They're different developments. I think that's true, and they look like they're around the same thing. But it's a good point. I mean, you do have in the United States right now, just in the kind of the cultural environment, I would say a loosening of constraints of a certain sort, which are not healthy. And by that, I don't mean that it's necessarily a free speech issue, but it's a violence issue. It's a successful incitement to violence, let's put it that way. That's a problem. And some of the things that are taking place inside universities, I don't see that happening so much, at least in many universities, and there's a countervailing kind of discourse there. So they're not the same thing as you point out, and it's an interesting phenomenon, there's no question.
Do you experience that here in Austria as well?
I just wanted to follow up. There's actually a researcher from the University of Chicago who wrote a very nice paper about exactly this question. He shows that the rhetoric of Trump encouraged lots of people to express xenophobic views, and it relates to a principle that is called pluralistic ignorance. So you have a private opinion and you think, I'm all alone with this opinion, so you don't dare to speak out. But once you see someone speaking it out in public, you realize that there's actually lots of other people who have the same opinion, and then you can have these swings in public expression. So this is Leo Burstein is the person who had the nice paper.
It is an interesting situation because I mean, race is obviously a huge and long-term issue in the United States, and it continues to be, and it's kind of maybe the fundamental problem for the United States to address. But I would say that the kind of ways that anti-Semitism, which was a significant feature of the United States in the first 75 years of the 20th century, which had dissipated a great deal, has risen again in very obvious ways. And there's a kind of a loosening of what's admissible in a cultural sphere.
Katerina Sarikakis, how do you experience that? We talked before. Maybe as a woman whose mother tongue is not German. Is there a conflict in the classroom?
Okay, the leap between racism and being looked at strangely in the beginning when you have an accent in all kinds of languages is big. But I think Again, first of all, academia is international, so I'm happy to be in academia. Everybody has an accent. So this is wonderful. Having said that, this is the message we need to pass on, that humanity has an accent, or many accents, and this is the whole point of academia and exploration and acceptance and all this fluffy stuff, all these fluffy ideas. At the same time, there are various levels, if we want to be honest with ourselves, various levels of legitimacy and of acceptance. There are certain accents that are more accepted and acceptable than others. There are certain ideas that are more easily acceptable than others and are promoted easier. There are certain methods of doing research that are more accepted than others. There are certain methods of teaching that, again, are uncomfortable. I tend to tell my students I do the Socratic method, meaning I'm not telling you anything, I'm asking you everything. And this is also not easy with people who expect information to be very straightforward. So without a strong university or strong institution and strong characters, again, behind you, you cannot do all that. And it's important to bear that in mind. I think the University of Vienna now have to praise our home because we have to. Also, the University of Vienna has reached the point of grandiosity and graciousness. But I believe this is true, and to offer the hand of support and solidarity, you have to be gracious yourself. So to achieve this, it meant that the University of Vienna has gone through a very long process. Not only the 650 years of its existence, but a long process of opening up to the international community and what the international community may have to offer to this society, to Austria, the university, and take also from it. And so here's my former employer, my initial employer, former rector Winkler. It is important, and I really value personally the idea of this freedom to sense a belonging in something bigger than your little department or even little faculty, but it's a bigger world. So this is important. This is a sense of freedom, I suppose.
So we're close to the end of this discussion. I want to ask all of you one last question. So what do you think, Eva Fodok? Can this be a wake-up call for Europe, for academic freedom, what you experienced in Hungary?
A wake-up call. I hope so. I like to think so. It doesn't really look like that. It looks more like it's a beginning of a long road that we'll all have to struggle together through. To some extent, it might be a wake-up call. It's a wake-up call, at least for us. A lot of us are quite complacent in our academic lives. You go, you do your research, you bury yourself in what you're doing, you go to your class, you teach your classes, but you don't think more broadly about what's going on, and you take some of these things for granted. So in that regard, this definitely has been, and I hope it will be for others as well, a wake-up call.
What is it going to be? The season of crisis or the season of freedom?
Well, I said at the beginning that we came here to celebrate academic freedom and solidarity, and I mean that. We are forced to move out of Hungary. This was not our choice, but we are excited about coming to Vienna and to Austria. Very often journalists ask me, can you say something about the situation in Austria as opposed to Hungary? And I abstain because I don't want to upset anybody, plus I don't really know. But the truth is the air is breathable here. And that's why we are here, and we are very grateful for your welcome. And we also believe that we are bringing something, that we are contributing something. We are not a big university, perhaps we are not a great university, so we can only specialize. So what we bring is the ambition that we can combine social sciences and humanities in creative ways, and perhaps in experiment in new ways. We also bring perhaps a degree of internationality that is not common in the region, not only in Hungary, and I want to convey this message to our colleagues from Austrian universities. We don't compete with you when it comes to recruiting students. We recruit from 160 countries of the world. I don't think we will have more than perhaps 10% Austrian students. And also, I think what we hope, and we don't want to give up hope, we don't want to give in. We think Vienna is a good environment for us to continue to do great things, sometimes crazy things, and we might be criticized for that. We invented the European Award for Excellence in Teaching in the Social Sciences and Humanities. And it was my idea. People asked, but who do you think you are to give such an award? But we wanted to signal that social sciences and humanities and teaching, not just research, is important. And because we are a private university, we had to raise the money, and we found someone as crazy as we, a Canadian family. Canada is not a crazy country, it's the last normal country on the planet, and that family endowed the prize. So, we are actually optimistic. We are sad about leaving Hungary, but we are optimistic at the same time.
Jean-Robert Tirant, are you optimistic?
One is we stand with CEU, as the sticker said. I was proud to wear it. And we want to collaborate with CEU also. So we don't see it as a competitor, really. We have, for example, I think the profiles are really complementary in many ways. For example, we have a program in philosophy and economics at the master level. You have something similar at the bachelor level, so there will be complementary. You have very good cognitive science research at CEU. We also have excellent researchers, and we want to further develop this here in Vienna. So we see a very good possibilities, both for students, but also in research. But perhaps we should ask the audience if they have some questions also to us.
No, I did, but they are shy.
Yeah, some courage, yeah.
Katerina Sarikakis, we talked a lot about crisis today. Is there still enough reason to be optimistic when we're talking about academic freedom?
Of course, it would be a bad ending if we were to say everything is doomed. Through crisis, there's this opportunity for a rebirth, to go back to the values we think we have been protecting, or we kind of ignored, or we took for granted. And a crisis shows that the system needs some more intervention, and the time is now because of those spaces that are opening up because of the crisis. So we have new opportunities for collaboration on the academic level, for example, but also a new level of awareness I think on a global level. As is the case with journalists, there's a lot of policies and a lot of public debate about the importance of the profession of being a journalist, but the importance of information. There's a lot of public policy happening. It was about time that the academic world entered this discussion about itself. So, but definitely I think the future lies with the students. So.
President Zimmer, you now have the chance not to be optimistic and explain to us why we are doomed.
No, I'm not going to do that. But, I'd go back to where you started, which was Dickens, and the best of times and the worst of times. And if you go to the end of that paragraph, he's describing this about the period around the French Revolution, of course. And then he gets to the conclusion saying, in other words, it's so much like the present time that I forget what the rest of it is, but he's just comparing the whole thing to the present time. And so that in a certain way, it's the best of times and the worst of times a lot of the time. And I think one thing I would say, just to finish, is that I think it's remarkable that we've seen these two institutions, both each in their own way because of different circumstances, take such a strong and forceful position about academic freedom and its importance, and that little bit contributes to it being the best of times.